Holy City Center Radio is episode 223, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, February 14th, 2024. Happy Valentine's Day to all you lovers and sinners out there, whether you are celebrating with your special someone or all by your lonesome. I hope you have a good day, and no matter what you're doing, who cares? It's okay if you're alone. It's okay if you're not. Enjoy your time, whatever you may or may not be doing. I hope it's a fantastic Wednesday. Excited to be back with you. Wow, what a Sunday I had, and what a game the Super Bowl turned out to be. We won't harp on those too much, but first, circling back to Valentine's Day, it's probably a little bit too late now, but in case you missed it, we had several Valentine's Day related posts on Holy City Center. Some are about, what restaurants are open, who's got specials, who's allowing you to order food to bring home for, like a special cook the meal at home type thing. There's also Galentine's Day options for you. That one is still very much relevant as there's several events throughout the rest of the month. And just maybe if you missed it this time, just keep in mind, usually with some of these bigger holidays, we'll have different posts up on my site as well as my sibling site, mylowcountry.com. Depending on what area of town you're in, will determine which of those sites is more, kind of in line with where you are. But we tend to have a lot of holiday posts, help you find some events, help you find some fun things to do. So just keep that in mind. St. Patrick's Day will probably be the next big one. So, that's when we'll probably share what bars and restaurants in town are holding parties and things. So keep an eye out for those. But yes, my Sunday was busy, as I mentioned in the last episode, which I recorded early because of that. I did make it up to Columbia to see my alma mater, the University of Connecticut, take on the Gamecocks in women's basketball. Sadly, it did not go the way of the school from the Northeast. The Gamecocks were victorious by 18 points. It was not so great to be there. Fans were fine. No one's giving me a hard time or anything. And the arena's good. And, yada, yada, yada. All that stuff was great. It was the game itself. Unfortunately, my Huskies did not have one of their better efforts, and Gamecocks just dominated them pretty much the entire game. So bummer for sure to travel up there, get excited to see them in person. I haven't seen the women play in person in several years. I think since they were playing college at Charleston, probably a decade plus ago now. Obviously I see games on TV and things, but so a bit of a bummer, but I made it back with plenty of time to spare before the Super Bowl started, and what a game it was. Don't need to harp on it, especially because it was the most watched Super Bowl in history. And I think I saw one of the highest rated, if not the highest rated television event in history, which would surpass things like the season finale of MASH, which has held that record for a long time. But for sure, the highest rated Super Bowl. No surprise given some of the stuff surrounding the game. Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, Chief among them. Chief, I didn't even mean to do that. But yes, the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, defeated San Francisco 49ers in overtime. Only the second overtime game in Super Bowl history. So very exciting, very thrilling. Halftime show seems like a lot of people were happy with that as well. And quite the contest. So, like I said, not going to harp on it since many of you probably watched it, since it was the most watched game in history. But also, I'm sure many of you avoided it at all costs for any manner of reason. But a very good game, so I was excited about that. We don't have a rooting interest. It's nice just to have something fun, to cheer or to watch, whether you want a particular team to win or not. So, a busy Sunday because of that, filled with sports. I'm back at it. As I'm recording this, back in the swing of things, working hard, getting things done on the site, just trying to relax a little bit before the next weekend and maybe some more fun things on the horizon. Before we dive into the latest news, just wanted to give you a heads up. There's some guys doing some work outside my door today as I record this. So you may hear some hammering or some other construction-like noises. So just a heads up, if you hear that in the background, I apologize. And because they're making so much noise, My cat, he's a little afraid, so he's upstairs with me, and he might be meowing in the background, which wouldn't be the first time. So just a quick heads up, if you're hearing some extra noise, that's what's going on today. And just unfortunately, there really is nothing I can do about either of them. So just wanted to apologize in advance in case you do pick up any of those as you're listening. But enough of that. Let's dive in. Hey, big shocker. That whole offering Anita Huggins the school superintendent position without going through the proper hiring process may have broke state law. Surprise, surprise. The Charleston County School District Board of Trustees may have done it again. So although I've said on previous podcasts, I kind of am like, oh, yeah, you know what? This whole going through a superintendent search process again and the hiring process, it's just going to cost them more and more money. They've already wasted so much with all these things that they've bungled. As much as I am kind of like, hey, good, I'm glad it's over. If they broke state law, then they need to fix it. And at least one local attorney is saying they have, although he is certainly not the only one with that opinion. We're just discussing one attorney who was interviewed by Live 5 News. So following the board's decision to hire a new superintendent last week, a lot of questions have been raised about the legitimacy of her contract. And I do want to say maybe there's community members questioning if she's qualified or not. I'm certainly not questioning her qualifications, and I don't think that necessarily the people who have questions about this whole process even think that she might not be qualified. They just don't understand why this board continually doesn't do the right thing, whether it's, breaking state law, causing confusion before meetings by not speaking with their fellow board members, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to just put that at the forefront. I don't know enough about her background to make give an educated opinion on, whether or not she is qualified. She seems to be, for what little I do know, but I just want to hammer that point home that it's not about her so much as the process. And actually, that's what my gripe and this lawyer's gripe is the process that went down. So Anita Huggins ultimately signed the contract. You may remember she released a statement saying she planned on it, and she talked about how hard this has been on her family, herself, of course, as well, but also her family, which includes children who, have been teased about their mom, saying she's not qualified or whatever it may be, because I'm sure their parents have said these things. And we've talked about how it's not fair to her at all that she was forced into this position. So she ultimately signed the contract, and then Board of Trustees, their chair, Keith Grabowski, ultimately put the final signature on the contract. So that's a done deal. Or is it? So other board members, including Dr. Carol Temple, said that they were not notified of Grabowski signing off on the contract. The agenda for the board's meeting on February 5th for a special called meeting also did not state the conversation of any contractual matter, just that there were changes to the superintendent's power over the district's organizational chart. So they made a decision about hiring and firing and what level of power the superintendent has in those matters. But as usual, magically, something very important has been left off the agenda for the meeting. So attorney William Hamilton says that the way Huggins' contract was approved is the third violation of the state's Freedom of Information Act that has been done by this board. So for a little bit more background, South Carolina Code of Laws, specifically Section 591980, addresses requirements for teachers and other employee employment. It states in part, quote, no such action or the memoranda of terms of any such contract of employment or purchase shall be duly recorded in the minutes of such meeting and approved by the board, end quote. So Charleston County School District's attorney, whose name is Wilbur Johnson, says that the specific law that I just mentioned does not necessarily include a superintendent contract. So on the one hand, you've got the attorney, William Hamilton, saying this violates the FOIA Act, the Freedom of Information Act, and he states a law, or I should say in the South Carolina Code of Laws related to the board. Meanwhile, the district's attorney is saying, no, that law doesn't specifically mention the superintendent, so this is totally fine. we'll see what exactly develops from here, if anything. So one way it could go, Hamilton has apparently asked, according to Live 5 News, he's asked the Attorney General's office to become involved and hold the board accountable for the violations. Attorney General is Alan Wilson. He has previously made a comment about the board, kind of broadly, but very specifically this board, about not following proper protocols and more importantly, laws. So he may weigh in, and who knows what will happen from there. Now, there's a lot more details about what law this may have violated and other things that this board may have potentially done wrong. And I encourage you to go look at the link in the show notes. The post is a little wonky, so it's diving deep into, laws. And you might even notice when I'm reading that section of the Code of Laws, it's hard to understand. These things aren't written clearly, so it's very, what I would imagine is like lawyers speak, like, hey, you've got to word it this way to make sure we're protected from this and this. So if you're interested in more details and that kind of stuff interests you, by all means, go check the link in the show notes. But that's going to be about the extent of what I'm going to go through here. But the bottom line is, as we've talked about many times, this school board just doesn't know what they're doing. They're unserious. At least a faction of the board, I should say, is unserious about governing or doing the right thing. They just got in because of culture wars. They don't really know what they're doing. They just kind of seem to be doing things on the fly. And they don't seem to really care because they have the majority and no one is holding them accountable in any way, shape, or form so far. And the only way you're going to fix that is if someone actually does hold them accountable. And maybe that'll be the Attorney General. We'll see what happens. I won't hold my breath, but perhaps we'll see some changes. But another wrinkle in this disaster of a superintendent search that has been bungled essentially since day one by this board. And again, when I say that, it's really just that Moms for Liberty faction of the board, which has a majority and just continues to make these mistakes, whether willfully or not, who knows? And it's costing the district so much money between lawsuits and having to redo processes that they did wrong. And of course, none of this is helping the children of these schools, which is what they're supposed to be doing. In other news, Charleston County is getting ready to take advantage of a new change in state law that uses more than $4 million in tourism taxes for affordable housing. The money, again, coming from tourism taxes, would establish a housing trust fund, which is something that's been debated for a while between county and housing advocates. Now, that money comes on top of more than $20 million in housing initiatives that the county has used federal funds to launch. So this is in addition to that. So, hey, more money towards affordable housing certainly seems like a good thing to me. Up until last year, state and local hotel taxes could only be used to attract and serve tourists. So there's been a tourism tax previously, but all of that had to go basically back into the tourism machine we have here in Charleston, and for that matter, many other parts of the state. But specifically here in Charleston County, that money is used to bring more tourists here, of course, and maybe create things that are specifically tourist driven or things that tourists like when they come to visit. So not necessarily just attracting them here, but trying to impress them while they're here with different initiatives and whatnot. That can mean things like advertising, supporting local venues and events that tend to attract overnight visitors, say like Seawee, which is coming up this weekend, or the Wine and Food Fest, where people are coming in for these big events for multiple days. And believe it or not, some of those tourism taxes even boosted police department budgets, which again makes sense. Police are serving the community, and that includes taking care of tourists and making sure tourists aren't breaking laws. And so, even though it's a little bit surprising to hear that, it does seem to make sense. So that was the case up until last year. But now local governments can use up to 15% of the accommodations taxes they collect to fund what's called workforce housing efforts. For Charleston County, that's $4.15 million based on last year's taxes. So obviously there could be some change in that number, all dependent on how well tourism does each year. The money would not be taken from venues and events that rely on what's called the A tax, but would come from unbudgeted reserve funds. So this isn't going to harm any venues or events that have been getting tourism dollars, tax dollars previously. They're still going to get that. So there's no change as far as that's concerned. Now, state law only allows those A tax funds to be used for housing until 2030. So this isn't a permanent measure. However, Senator Tom Davis, who's a Republican from Beaufort, who actually sponsored this bipartisan legislation that was signed into law back in last May, he has said it will hopefully be extended if it proves successful. So that's good news. If they're actually creating affordable housing, it seems to be working for all parties involved. The state legislature can move this to be permanent or extend past that 2030 current deadline that is in place. Now, for those wondering, we know it's very expensive to live in the Charleston area. It gets more and more expensive, depending on parts of the area. There's different pockets, of course, that aren't as expensive as others. But for the most part, it's pretty hard to live here, especially a lot of people who work downtown. They can't even afford to live downtown. And this is something that's not breaking news. We all know this. We've been talking about it as a community for a long, long time. But specifically, just to put a number on it, the median selling price of a single family home in Charleston County jumped from $400,000 at the start of 2020 to $635,000 last month. Those numbers are coming from the Charleston Trident Association of Realtors. So in, essentially 3 years, I know 2020 to January of 2024 is 4 years, but, we haven't completed this year yet, so we'll see what happens. But 400,000 up to 635,000 as a median selling price is quite the jump in that amount of time. So that's the gist of it. Tourism taxes a portion of them can now go towards affordable housing. Hopefully it'll be implemented correctly and in the best way possible, and it'll work out for all involved. And it's not going to solve a problem, I'm sure, but can alleviate the problem. Again, much like the last story, the Post, this one by the Post and Courier, their article gets into a lot more detail. Again, a little wonky when it starts coming to laws and descriptions of the different types of taxes and everything. So I try to just give you the gist of it. If you want to dive more into the details, just hit the link in the show notes. And our last story has to do with the Charleston Police Department and some of the disparities that we're still seeing on racial lines within that department. Now, the Charleston Police Department had almost total compliance with a recommendation from an earlier racial bias audit. That's the good news. They have implemented different procedures and recommendations that came from an audit that was looking at the year 2019 about where there might be some racial bias within the department. Things like traffic stops, the types of arrests, comparing that to the percentage of different races that are in the community. And they took those and they seem to have taken it seriously, according to a review. And they have almost total compliance with each of the recommendations that they were given. The bad news is that racial disparities have continued despite this. So outside researchers were hired by the city of Charleston last year to assess the department's fidelity to the more than 70 recommendations from that 2019 audit. Jeffrey Alpert, who is a University of South Carolina criminologist, and Kyle McLean, a policing expert at Clemson University, and finally Bob Kale, a sociologist who runs his own strategic planning and research firm, all applauded the police for what they called a good faith effort, and when they were looking at how they did with these recommendations, and they found that all but 2 recommendations were either complete or currently in progress 4 years later. So that's again related to the good news I said. Police ended up changing policies and improved data collection, which allowed for a better analysis of their practices. The resulting study, however, did find that disparities, especially among traffic stops, have actually increased, not just continued, but they've increased since 2019. Obviously, that's the bad news. The report found, for specifics here, the report found that black drivers are stopped more often than white drivers, even though they are a smaller part of the driving public. So percentage-wise, something is not adding up there. I don't think any of this surprises us based on similar stories we've heard about police across the country. On top of that, when they were cited, black drivers were more likely to receive multiple tickets in comparison to their white counterparts. So even putting aside that they're stopping more black drivers than white drivers, let's look, when they're actually cited. They found that black drivers are getting more tickets than their white counterparts. Now, compounding on that, when police have cause enough to search a vehicle, so not just like a regular traffic stop, taillight out, whatever, if they have cause to actually initiate a search of the vehicle, contraband has been found in 70% of searches of white drivers, but in only about half of the searches of black drivers. So seems to point out that when police say they have probable cause to search a vehicle, they're finding that their intuition, their suspicions, whatever it may be, are when they're having an interaction with a white driver, 70% of the time they're finding something. But for some reason, when they have the same suspicions about black drivers, they're only finding about 50% of, actual contraband or whatever else they may have been looking for. This, of course, suggests that black drivers are searched at higher rates, at least, again, according to this analysis. Still, black drivers account for more than 4 times the number of arrests than white drivers. So that's the other side of this. They're stopping black drivers far more than white drivers. When they claim to have cause to search a vehicle, they're finding more contraband with white drivers than black drivers, which seems to suggest they're just claiming to have cause for something when maybe there really isn't when it comes to black drivers, and that, of course, black drivers are being searched more as well. And on top of that, black drivers are getting arrested at a 4 times higher rate than white drivers. Again, I don't think any of this surprises us. It's disappointing that after taking an audit seriously and being like, hey, let's put forth a real effort here. Let's not just check a box. Let's actually try to implement these things that we're told can help improve our policing and these biases, whether they are implicit or not. And not only have they seen these trends continue, they've actually increased. Again, disappointing, not surprising. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Or maybe just let a friend know, hey, got this good podcast about Charleston I like. Maybe you'll like it too. You can also support by going to patreon.com/Holy City Center and signing up for one of those support tiers. And of course, just by visiting holycitycenter.com, liking posts on social media, retweeting, sharing, whatever, any kind of interaction you can do with the website and social channels in this podcast is a big, big help. And I really appreciate those who take the time to do those things. Before I sign off, I need to say thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And another big thank you has to go out to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I will be back on Friday with the latest news. I'm already looking forward to it, but until then, good night and good luck.